A single line on a map can change the world. It can divide families, create enemies, and alter the course of history for generations. For the Korean people, this is not theoretical. It is a painful reality they have lived with for over 70 years. Before 1945, there was one Korea, a peninsula with a rich, unified history stretching back for over a millennium, a land of shared culture, language, and heritage. But today, two distinct nations exist where one once stood: the Democratic People's Republic of Korea in the north, and the Republic of Korea in the south. The story of how this came to be is a tapestry woven from global conflict, political maneuvering, and the desires of the Korean people themselves. This division was not born from an internal civil war, at least not at first. It began as a temporary measure, proposed by foreign powers amid the chaos of World War II's end. The plan was simple on paper and catastrophic in practice. Two superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union, emerged with opposing visions for the post-war world. Korea, newly freed from decades of colonial rule, was caught in their burgeoning rivalry. How did a temporary line, the 38th parallel, harden into one of the most fortified borders on Earth? To understand the split, we trace the timeline and the key players who shaped Korea's fate. The story of Korea's division begins with its loss of sovereignty. For centuries, Korea was an independent kingdom, navigating complex relationships with China and Japan. By the early 20th century, an expansionist Japan set its sights on the peninsula. In 1910, Japan annexed Korea, beginning 35 years of colonial rule. It was a dark era for the Korean people. Authorities sought to erase Korean culture, suppressing language, forcing Japanese names, and imposing Shinto rites. Resistance met brutal force. Korean identity was pushed to the brink, resources were plundered, and many were conscripted into forced labor and the imperial army. Still, the desire for independence never died. Some, like Kim Il-sung, fought as guerrillas from Manchuria and Siberia. Others, like Syngman Rhee, lobbied for Korea abroad. They were diverse, but united in their goal: liberation. World War II turned the tide, with Allied leaders pledging a free Korea in due course. The bombings and Soviet entry into the war forced Japan's sudden surrender on August 15, 1945. After 35 years, the yoke lifted, and hope surged. But there was no unified Korean government ready to take power. Allied forces stepped in to disarm the Japanese and maintain order. A rushed decision in August 1945 would have permanent consequences. In the wake of surrender, nearly 700,000 Japanese troops and civilians had to be managed in Korea. Soviet troops were close, Americans were far. Fearing a full Soviet occupation, U.S. planners needed a quick dividing line. Two colonels, Rusk and Bonesteel, had 30 minutes to propose one. They chose the 38th parallel, placing Seoul in the U.S. zone. To American surprise, Stalin accepted, likely for strategic reasons. An arbitrary line, with no regard for geography or culture, was set. Soviets took the north, Americans the south, explicitly as a temporary military arrangement. Troops entered their zones. On the ground, the line began to harden. Travel and trade became difficult. Families suddenly cut off. Each power imported its system and worldview, along with deep suspicions. The Cold War had begun, and Korea became one of its first testing grounds. Both superpowers backed local leaders aligned with their ideologies. In the north, the Soviets elevated Kim Il-sung, a former guerrilla and staunch communist. With Soviet backing, he purged rivals, redistributed land, nationalized industry, and built a Soviet-style state. In the south, amid factional chaos, Syngman Rhee emerged as Washington's choice. A hardline anti-communist, he polarized politics and cracked down on opponents. Kim built the KPA with Soviet aid and a powerful cult of personality, envisioning reunification by force. Rhee vowed to march north under a capitalist anti-communist state, backed by the United States. Allied plans for trusteeship met fierce Korean opposition. U.S.-Soviet talks deadlocked. The UN called for peninsula-wide elections, but the North denied access. Washington proceeded with elections in the South amid unrest and boycotts. The Republic of Korea formed in Seoul with Syngman Rhee as president. The North responded, proclaiming the DPRK in Pyongyang under Kim Il-sung. Each claimed to be the legitimate government of all Korea. Both leaders spoke of reunification by force. Border clashes escalated. After hesitation, Stalin approved an invasion plan in early 1950, offering aid but not troops. On June 25, the KPA stormed across the line, overwhelming the South. Seoul fell in 3 days, triggering a global response. With Moscow boycotting, the UN authorized a US-led force. By September, UN and ROK forces clung to the Pusan perimeter. A daring landing at Incheon cut North Korean supply lines and retook Seoul. UN troops advanced past the 38th toward the Chinese border. China intervened with massive counterattacks, forcing a UN retreat. The war ground into stalemate around the old dividing line. Cities lay in ruins. Millions were killed, wounded, or made refugees. On July 27, 1953, an armistice, not a peace treaty, drew a military demarcation line and a 4-kilometer-wide DMZ. The war ended, but the division grew deeper and more permanent. The armistice froze the conflict, not the tension. The DMZ became one of the most militarized borders on Earth. Two identities solidified within opposing alliances. With aid from China and the USSR, Kim tightened control, promoted Juche, and built a garrison state. In the South, U.S. security and aid fueled rebuilding, under authoritarian rule that later democratized. The miracle on the Han River led to a thriving democracy. Beyond geopolitics, the deepest wound is human. Millions were separated, no calls, no letters, no contact for decades. In the South alone, an estimated 10 million have northern relatives. Sporadic reunions offer brief, heartbreaking glimpses of what was lost. Language, lifestyles, and values diverged into different worlds. Both poured fortunes into arms, resources diverted from social needs. Today, more than 70 years later, the peninsula remains technically at war. South Korea is a global economic power. North Korea remains isolated, yet armed with nuclear weapons. Why the split endured? The post-1945 power vacuum, a temporary line at the 38th, Cold War rivalry, unbending leaders, and the Korean War that cemented division. Great power backing on both sides has maintained a tense equilibrium. For many young South Koreans, reunification feels abstract and costly. In the North, people have no say. A temporary line became a permanent border, fracturing a shared destiny by forces largely beyond Korean control.